I want to show you this video clip that will show you the face of Huntington's disease, and then we'll go back to the study guide. Okay? All right.
It was in the 1980s when Marie Clay first noticed her husband showing some unusual behaviors, like memory lapses and moments of rage.
Finally, he did go to a doctor, and they did some tests on him, and they found out he had Huntington's disease. So he didn't know anything about it. He just knew it was a brain disorder.
What? And then, oh, I hope I was getting that.
About 4 years after Phil Clay was diagnosed, the Clay's oldest daughter, Lori, started showing the same signs of the genetic disease: clumsiness, memory loss, and speech problems.
The doctor came in and just matter-of-factly said, "You're positive." I mean, it was like pretty much like a death sentence, really, because we knew what was going on with their dad. And so it was very, very emotional.
Children of people with Huntington's disease, which is incurable, have a 50-50 chance of inheriting the same faulty gene. Lori's son Michael is 12 years old. He is yet to be tested.
My aunt hasn't gotten tested yet, and it's a very hard decision because if you get tested and you're positive, you know that you're gonna have it.
Lori Clay tested positive 11 years ago. She's now 39. The disease makes it hard for her to sit still in a chair and formulate her thoughts about the disease, but she agreed to try. She wants people to know how hard the disease has made it to be the mother she wants to be to her son, or to do the normal, everyday things that most people take for granted.
And, not be able to drive. I haven't driven in like 8 years. Doing those sorts of things, running errands or running, what brings me mostly the appointments and grocery store, all the errands. So, we had to do all those things, but I'm blessed though. It's horrible, but I am blessed. But just not be able to do so many things like other people and their moms. It's just always been hard.
It's a monster. It's a culmination of many diseases put together. I mean, it's like no other disease that mankind has ever seen, and it's a shame that so little people know about it.
What? And then, oh, I hope I was getting that. It only goes a couple seconds. Make sure.
Okay. This is a young lady whose mother has Huntington's disease. I want to talk about her just a little bit here, okay? And then we'll look at page 10 of the study guide. All right, Shanna Martin. Anybody ever heard of her? Let me just show you some of the things she's done. Big Ten Conference All Academic. Now this was back in 2000 to 2002. University of Wisconsin Scholar Athlete. Varsity letter in track and field from the University of Wisconsin. One of those Badgers, right? Wisconsin. University of Wisconsin women's pole vault record holder. And then later on, Coach of the Year at Wesleyan University. Quite an accomplished person academically and athletically. A person with a lot of courage. And a person with a mother who has Huntington's disease. So here's Shanna, here's her mom in later stages of Huntington's disease. What's interesting about Shanna, she is a person of intense self-discipline, courage, intelligence, strength. But she says here I have a 50% chance of also getting Huntington's disease. This is a scary thing, but I have known about this for most of my life. There is a test available, but I don't have the guts to take it. I'm sure I will before I start a family, though. I am very open to all of this, so if anybody has any questions about the disease or the personal factors of it, feel free to contact me. I do really want more people to have knowledge about it since it is such a rare disease. So, I don't know. If you were in her shoes, raise your hand if you think you might just go in and get that blood test and have them do that DNA analysis to see if you have the gene or not. Raise your hand if you would do that. If you would go and have the test done.
I would do it before I start a family, though.
Before you start a family? Okay. Raise your hand if you think, no, I wouldn't do it. I would not get the test. Anybody? You know, I was at a conference several years ago, National Association of Biology Teachers. I think it was in Atlanta. And somebody gave a talk who was an expert on Huntington's disease. Actually, her name is Nancy Wexler, and she's a researcher researching Huntington's disease. PhD, very smart person. And her mother, I believe it was her mother. Was it her mother or her dad? I think it was her mother has Huntington's disease. So this woman, Nancy Wexler, has a 50% chance of having the gene as well. She told a story about a young man in his early 20s who had a parent with Huntington's disease. And this young man had lived his life on an adrenaline rush. This young man was really into things like, okay, skydiving, and not just skydiving, but waiting until the last exciting moment where you can still pull the parachute cord, motorcycle racing, rock climbing. You ever seen like pictures of these guys rock climbing, hanging on by their fingertips without any protective gear like ropes and stuff like that? That's what this guy was into. He was into all this high adrenaline, really dangerous, living life on this edge, exciting kinds of activities. He was into that kind of stuff. Hang gliding, all kinds of really exciting things like that. And finally he decided, okay, I'm going to get the test. I'm going to see if I've got that dominant Huntington's gene. And he got the test, and he got the results back, and the way he felt about the results were totally different than what you might expect. The results came back that he was negative. He did not have the Huntington's gene. So how do you think he felt when he found out?
Was he sad?
Huh?
Was he sad?
He was kind of depressed. Believe it or not. Now you would think, oh my gosh, I don't have the Huntington's gene. Yes, I might live to be 90-something. He was actually kind of sad, just the opposite kind of an effect. He suddenly realized, oh my goodness, I might live to be into my 80s or 90s. I might live a long life after all. Maybe it's not wise for me to be doing all this really dangerous, fun stuff. Maybe I need to tone it down a little bit. But I love doing all those kinds of things. Motorcycle racing, car racing, hang gliding, jumping out of airplanes and stuff. Maybe I better be careful. And he actually went into some kind of depression as a result of that. So I just found that to be a really interesting story because you just don't know how people are going to feel. I guess you don't know how you would feel unless you were really in that person's shoes, right? So let's look at Shanna. Back to Shanna Martin's story here. Oh, here she is. There's Shanna. That's her brother. That's her dad. That's her mom. Later stages of Huntington's disease. Oh, that's the turkey. Okay. Must have been Thanksgiving. It's a devastating illness. So, let me show you a real story. Another real story that I heard about from a genetic counselor of an actual family. Now, this was in the Indianapolis area several years ago. Page 10. Okay. I'm not going to use any names here. The names have been removed to protect the people's privacy. But we're talking about a mom who was 43 years old and she had Huntington's disease. She had no signs of the disease until she was 37. Now, I know that you guys probably think 37 is old, right?
It's not that old.
It's not that old. You think 37 is old? I'm going to be 64 this month. Do you think I think 37 is old?
Probably not.
No, 37 is not old. That's when she was diagnosed with Huntington's disease. Her husband, 44 years old when this happened, was normal. So, think back on Mendelian genetics last semester. What would be Dad's genotype? Let's use H's.
Little H, little H.
Excellent. Okay, so he'd be little h, little h. And the mom who had Huntington's disease, what's her genotype?
Either big H, or big H, little H.
Okay, it's going to be big H, little h.
Not big H, big
Big H. Couple reasons. That big H allele is very rare in the population. That's one reason. The other reason is big H individuals miscarry.
Always?
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
They aren't born. Okay. Do you remember dwarfism, achondroplasia, another dominant condition? Anybody who has that, like the actor in the movie Elf, Peter, I can't remember his last name. You know what I'm talking about? He has achondroplasia. And look how famous he is. Look what he's done. He's probably making pretty good money. Okay. He has achondroplasia. He's big D, little d. Embryos that are big D miscarry. They aren't born. Okay. So, these two people had 6 kids, and all those children were born before mom was 30. So, this woman had 6 children, and she probably passed it on to half her kids before she even knew she had the gene to pass on. You with me? And so, these are their 6 children. They had 3 daughters and 3 sons. And this is the story. This really happened. A family in the Indianapolis area. They had a 21-year-old daughter who, at the time of this event right here, was recently married. Now, this 21-year-old daughter recently married, well, recently married within the last year, okay? She wanted to get tested because, you know, they're thinking about having a family. The 20-year-old daughter wanted to get tested. The 16-year-old sophomore in high school daughter wanted to get tested, but she has to wait until she's 18. Normally, in most states, in most clinics, you have to be 18 before you can make the decision to get tested. Okay? Now, the genetic counselor would tell the 16-year-old daughter all about what's involved in testing. You know, the story would probably go something like this. When you get to be 18, then you can have this test if you want it done. 3 boys, senior in high school, junior, and an 8th grader. And I want to tell you what those kids all decided and what the results turned out to be. Okay? The 21-year-old recently married daughter got tested. Now, before I tell you the results, I want to show you how the test worked. Okay, here's what they did. They took DNA from the parents. from a portion of human chromosome number 4. All right, that's the locus right there of the Huntington's gene. 4p16.3. Whoa, whoa, what's that mean?
The location on the DNA.
Yeah, well, that's the location on the specific chromosome where the gene's located. Right. Can you tell me anything about where that gene is based on the locus there, 4p16.3? What do you know?
I know it's on the top half, the smaller half.
Okay, P arm, the short arm of the chromosome. Which chromosome? Good, 4. Chromosome 4, the short arm, the P arm, and section 16.3. So it's on the tip of chromosome number 4. So they took DNA from that region of that chromosome, from Dad. Now from here to here, let's say that that's that particular section of DNA on the tip of chromosome 4 that they identified. This piece right here represents the gene. So that's Dad's normal gene there. I'm going to label that little h. They did the same thing with Mom. Here's Mom's DNA. Starts here, ends here. Here's Mom's gene, but it's a mutated version. That's the Huntington's disease gene. I'm going to label that big H. Okay, you all with me? Everybody making sense so far? What do you notice about, raise your hand when you notice it. What do you notice about Mom's normal gene here compared to Dad's normal gene compared to Mom's Huntington's gene right there? What do you notice? Raise your hand when you got it. What do you notice? Just looking at the two genes. I'm going to use the random pointing finger of volunteerism. What do you notice? Yeah, the normal gene is like shorter. It's a shorter piece of DNA. Here's why. Look at this. Huntington's disease is caused by triplet repeats, the CAG. Remember the last time we talked about tandem repeats? Repeating little pieces of DNA that are repeated, okay, in tandem. Caused by triplet repeats, CAG in the gene. So in other words, if you look at Mom's DNA, Mom's Huntington's gene right there, it's longer because she's got more of these CAG repeats in there. It stretches the gene out, disrupts the normal function of that gene. Does that make sense, Claudia? Make sense? Now here's what we know. People who are normal, who don't have Huntington's disease, they can have anywhere from 10 to 29 CAG repeats in that gene, in that H gene, okay? People who have Huntington's disease are going to end up with, they're going to have like somewhere between 36 and 121 repeats within that gene. So you want to be, you guys all have, none of you has Huntington's disease, or none of you has the Huntington's disease gene. So you guys all have somewhere between 10 to 29 CAG repeats in that H gene, okay? Now, this mama up here in this family, does she have 36 or does she have 121? Who knows? She's got some number in between there that makes that gene too long, disrupts the normal function of that gene. Now look what happened when they collected this piece of DNA from the tip of chromosome 4 from Dad and the same piece from Mom, and in the lab they added a restriction enzyme, the same restriction enzyme to both parents' DNA. Look what happened. Well, you guys tell me what happened. When they added the restriction enzyme to Dad's piece of DNA, how many fragments did they get? 3. The restriction enzyme cut here, there, and That's it. So dad ends up with 1, 2, 3 fragments. When they added the same restriction enzyme to mom's DNA, 3 cut sites, mom ends up with 4 fragments. And when they run those through a gel, they could see 3 bands for dad, 4 bands for mom. And so that's what they did. So if you're one of these kids, if you're one of these children in this family, and they run your DNA, they add the same restriction enzyme to your DNA that they added to your parents, how many bands would you want to see? 3. Okay? You want to see 3 bands. If there are 4 bands, you've got the gene. You've got the bad gene. So, the daughter who's recently married. Anybody want to take a guess as to what they discovered when they ran her DNA? She's a happily married newlywed, okay? Four bands. 4 fragments in the gel, 4 bands. Okay. Now, do you think that was devastating news to her and her husband? Now her husband knows that when they're in the prime of life, like maybe having little kids and careers really getting going, maybe buying a house, maybe finally having some money, right? Maybe finally getting their college loans paid off. The good times of their life, the disease strikes and she starts that slow downhill slide. And towards the end, he knows he's going to be taking care of her. She's going to have to be fed. She's going to have to be, well, not strapped into a high chair, but strapped into a wheelchair. She's going to have to be fed. She's going to have her diaper changed. She's going to have to be bathed. She's going to have to be constantly cared for. So, when the couple recently married finally came to grips with this, of course they went through all the stages of grief. Have you guys learned about the stages of grief in health class or psychology class or something? When people get news like that, they go through those stages. When they finally got to the acceptance stage, I'm told that the 21-year-old woman said, okay, well, now I'm going to tell you that we've just found out we're pregnant. And so what's the next question? That they might ask. Try to imagine. What do you think?
Whether or not,
Well, does my unborn baby have the Huntington's gene? Lots of questions, okay? Does the unborn baby have the Huntington's gene? And then, oh my gosh, do we do amniocentesis and collect DNA from the fetal skin cells that are floating in the amniotic fluid? Do we do that amniocentesis and do the same test on the unborn baby's DNA? And if the unborn baby has Huntington's disease, is a normal life up until age 35 or 40 worth living? Or do we save that child of ours the grief and the worry of going through life wondering if he or she has a Huntington's gene? Do we terminate the pregnancy? What do we do? Okay. They went ahead and did the prenatal test. Anybody want to take a guess as to what they found out? The unborn baby had 4 bands. Okay, so it gets real bioethical now. Do we terminate this pregnancy, or is a life of 35 or 40 years, worth it. And in 40 years from now, might there be a cure for Huntington's disease? That's something else to think about. I don't know what they decided after that. 20-year-old daughter, engaged, decided to get tested. Want to take a guess? How many bands? 3. Quite relieved. The 16-year-old sophomore daughter, at the time that this happened, knew all about the test. She was educated about the test, but couldn't get tested until she was 18, so she had to wait. Same thing with the 13-year-old 8th grade son, of course. The 18-year-old senior boy, very popular at school, good student, good-looking kid, well-rounded, involved in extracurricular activities and stuff. He decided, I want to get tested. Because, and this is what he said. He said, if I find out I've got the gene, I'm going to stop dating. I'm not going to let myself get involved and fall in love. Because then I might get married someday and I don't want to saddle my wife with having to take care of me and all that kind of stuff. He got the test. 4 bands. 4 bands. See how this affects families? 17-year-old junior boy said, okay, when I turn 18, I don't want to know. I'm not going to get tested. I'm not going to get tested. I don't want to know. And that's how some people in this situation deal with that. So that's an actual case I learned about from a genetic counselor. So it happens. It's real life kind of stuff. Any questions about this? Any questions? Let's see, on Bronco days, what time do we get out? Oh, 37? No. When? We don't know. See, Bronco days are so weird, I always have to look. I always have to look and look at my cheat sheet. Oh, 38. 9:38. Okay. I want to show you guys some other ways that DNA fingerprinting has been used, or different forms of DNA fingerprinting. Like this one, for example, check this out. Y chromosome. Hey, Daquan, do you remember the Y chromosome? Justin, remember the Y chromosome? Okay, Y chromosome. Interesting thing about the Y chromosome. As it moves from generation to generation within a family, it changes somewhat, but doesn't change all that much from generation to generation. So guess what? My Y chromosome is almost identical. Identical. If you do like DNA fingerprinting on key regions of the Y chromosome, my Y chromosome is like identical to my dad's. My son's Y chromosome is identical to mine. My grandson's Y chromosome is identical to mine, identical to my son's. My Y chromosome is identical to my dad's. It's identical to my grandfather's. It's identical to my great-grandfather's. That's kind of how it works as the Y chromosome goes generation after generation. So some people who are really interested in history and really interested in genetics have done studies of these Y chromosomes through the generations. And Daquan, there's our scrawny little Y chromosome right there. Let me show you what interesting discovery was made in regards to this. Anybody know who that is? What? Did you ask if it was me?
No.
Oh, I didn't hear you, sorry. He's looking at a bush that's on fire, but it's not being consumed. Burning bush. Who is that? You guys know who that is. Who? Moses. There's a story among the Hebrews, the Jewish people, and other people also. Moses lived, roughly a little over 3,000 years ago. And, he had an older brother named Aaron. And Aaron was the first high priest in the Jewish people's religion, okay? That's what a priest would have looked like. That's what the high priest would have looked like. And according to their traditions, Aaron, Moses' older brother, was the first high priest. Now, there are people today who have the last name of Cohen, Cohen. Have you ever heard that name? Cohen? Wait a minute. Doesn't President Trump, yeah. You guys keep up on the news? There's a guy who's in big trouble and he's going to go to prison. His last name is Cohen and he was President Trump's fixer or lawyer. Nod your head yes if you've been keeping up on the news. Cohen, Cohen. Cohen and other forms of that name like Cohen or Kahn, various forms of that word in Hebrew mean priest. Okay? So, guys in the Jewish religion who have the last name of Cohen or some form of it claim that they are in a long line that goes back to priests. Okay? That their ancestors, one of their ancestors or some of their ancestors might have been priests. In the ancient Jewish religion, in order to be a priest, you had to be the son of a priest. It was inherited. And so anybody who was a priest or the son of a priest believed that they could trace their ancestry back to Aaron over 3,000 years ago. You with me? Okay. So some geneticists several years ago did an interesting study where they found a whole bunch of Jewish men all over the world who had the last name of Cohen or some variation of that last name. And they collected DNA and specifically targeted the Y chromosome and did this DNA fingerprinting analysis study of the Y chromosome of these guys. And they discovered, it was interesting, that all these guys all over the world, Jewish men who have that last name, which means priest in Hebrew, their Y chromosomes were all very similar, pretty much the same. It's like, oh my gosh, they're all related distantly. And not only that, but when they did molecular clock studies, looking at mutation rates through time, they calculated that all these guys all over the world, all these Jewish men whose last name is Cohen, not only do they have matching Y chromosomes or very similar Y chromosomes, but it appears that they all came from a common ancestor who lived a little over 3,000 years ago. It's like, oh my gosh, interesting. So that's one way that DNA fingerprinting has been put to use in studying lineages of people and their ancestors over time. Here's another way that was put to use. Anybody know who that is? Who is that? From your history classes. Raise your hand if you know who that is. Let me give you a hint. Our school is named after him. Who is that? Third President of the United States. Who is it? Thomas Jefferson. Big scandal. There was a big scandal. Public scandals with politicians, that's nothing new. When Thomas Jefferson was president of the United States, back in the late 1700s, early 1800s, there was a big scandal in the papers. And the scandal was that he had fathered a child with one of his slaves. A young woman named Sally Hemings, one of his slaves. That was a big scandal. And the story goes that there was a young slave boy who worked in Thomas Jefferson's home, not as a field slave out in the field doing really hard work, like picking cotton or whatever, but he was a house servant. And his name was Easton Hemings, and he was the son of this slave girl, Sally Hemings. And he was a house servant. And Thomas Jefferson looked after him with special care, even provided for his education. And so everybody, there's all these rumors going around, okay? Can you imagine? Now, in all fairness to Thomas Jefferson, Thomas Jefferson's wife had died years before this story, okay? So he wasn't married. And Sally Hemings, the slave woman, would go on trips with Thomas Jefferson, like to France and wherever. They were seen a lot together. And in all fairness, the stories that people relate from that time indicate that they were very affectionate with one another, they were in love, and that this was not a forced thing. It wasn't a rape or something like that. But it was still a scandal, okay? Because in those days, the thought of relationships between white people and dark-skinned slaves was, that just wasn't thought of in those days. We've come a long ways in this country since then, hopefully, but we still have a long ways to go. So some geneticists a few years ago were interested in this story, and they wanted to find out, using DNA testing on Y chromosomes, was Thomas Jefferson really the father of that Easton Hemings? But what's the problem with trying to do that kind of a study? How would you do DNA testing on Thomas Jefferson's Y chromosome? What's the problem here?
He's dead.
He's dead. He's been dead for a long time. He's dust now, right? So how are you going to do DNA testing on his Y chromosome? Well, there's a roundabout way they did it. And I want to share with you next time how they did that and what the results were. Okay? It's another interesting case of how people interested in history and people in genetics have used this molecular genetics technique stuff to investigate that question, that mystery right there. So we'll talk about that next time, okay?